This is not a story meant to comfort you. It is not here to protect institutions, belief systems, or official explanations. This is a record, a collection of documents, decisions, and silences that still shape how the world understands itself. Some of these records are forgotten, some are restricted, and some are deliberately sealed, waiting for a future that can no longer challenge them. This is the Quiet Files, and this file asks a question that people have whispered for generations but rarely say out loud. What is the Vatican really hiding? Part 1. The Archive Problem. Here's the part everyone tiptoes around. The Vatican doesn't just hold history, it controls access to it. And control is the difference between preservation and possession. Inside Vatican City is the Vatican Apostolic Archive. It used to be called the Vatican Secret Archive. People will tell you that secret never meant hidden, only private. Fine, private is still the problem. Because this archive isn't a family photo album, it isn't personal diaries, it's world history. Letters between popes and kings, diplomatic negotiations, church decisions that shaped law, records connected to wars, regimes, alliances, and collapses. And the average person will never read it. Not because it doesn't exist, because you're not invited. Access is not open. You don't just walk in, you apply. You explain what you want. You name your topic, and someone decides if your questions are acceptable. Think about that. Not whether you're qualified, whether your curiosity is approved. And here's where it gets controversial. Because once you control access, you control narrative. You control what scholars can verify, what journalists can confirm, what the public can debate. You don't have to destroy a document to erase its impact, you just have to delay it, or keep it behind a door no one can open. Some people defend this. They say the archive is complex, that documents need context, that untrained eyes will misinterpret. Okay, but here's the question. Who decides what an untrained mind is? Who decides which interpretations are dangerous? And why is the solution always the same? Restriction, delay, control. Because if the truth is stable, it survives inspection. And if it requires a gatekeeper, maybe it isn't truth. Maybe it's a version. This is what makes the Vatican archive different. It isn't just about what's inside, it's about what's kept out. Because history locked away doesn't stop being history. It becomes leverage. And the oldest institutions on Earth did not survive by giving leverage away. So ask the obvious question. If the Vatican has nothing to fear, why does it fear open access? Who picked the story? Here's where the conversation usually breaks down. People talk about faith as if it appeared whole, as if the story was always settled. It wasn't. Early Christianity was chaotic. There was no single doctrine, no unified belief, no agreed-upon scripture. There were competing gospels, competing teachers, competing ideas about who Jesus was and what he actually taught. Some texts said salvation came through faith. Others said it came through knowledge. Some emphasized obedience. Others emphasized inner authority. Those differences weren't philosophical, they were political. Because belief shapes behavior, and behavior determines who holds power. So decisions were made, councils gathered, texts were reviewed, arguments were settled by vote. Some writings were included, others were excluded. Not erased, just labeled dangerous. They were called heretical, unapproved, too confusing, too disruptive. But ask yourself what those texts actually threatened. They didn't deny belief, they challenged hierarchy. They suggested that divine understanding was personal, that authority wasn't external, that access to truth didn't require permission. That's a problem for any institution, especially one built on structure, obedience, and continuity. So the story was narrowed, simplified, standardized, not because it was the only truth, but because it was manageable. And once a version of history becomes official, Every other version becomes a threat. Those excluded writings didn't disappear, they survived, in fragments, in private collections, in archives that the public will never see. This is where people ask the wrong question. They ask, did the church lie? That's too narrow. The real question is this: who benefits when one version of belief is declared complete? Because once a story is fixed, authority becomes permanent. And when authority is permanent, control doesn't need force. It only needs silence. Time-sealed documents. This is where the conversation stops being theoretical. Because the Vatican doesn't just restrict access, it delays history. There are entire collections inside the archive that are sealed by date, not damaged, not missing, not disputed, just locked until a future year arrives. Sometimes 50 years, sometimes 100, sometimes longer. The explanation is always the same: context, sensitivity, the need for historical distance. That sounds reasonable until you look closer. Many of the people involved are already dead: popes, kings, politicians, entire governments, yet the seal remains. So this isn't about privacy, it's about impact. Because history doesn't just inform, it rewrites reputations, it shifts moral authority, it changes who looks righteous and who looks complicit. Time sealing doesn't protect the past, it protects the present. The consequences are neutralized. No one can respond, no one can correct, no one can be held accountable. The story is released after the argument is over. That's not transparency, that's containment. And ask yourself this: if the documents are harmless, why wait? If they change nothing, why delay? Time-sealed records only make sense if time itself is part of the strategy. Because a truth released too late is easier to dismiss, easier to reframe, easier to absorb without consequence. This is not preservation. This is power management. The Dead Sea Scrolls. This is where denial stops working. Because this isn't rumor, it isn't theory, it's documented history. In 1947, ancient manuscripts were found in caves near the Dead Sea. They were authenticated, dated, confirmed to be older than the New Testament. This should have been the moment everything opened up. Instead, everything closed. Control of the scrolls was handed to a small group of scholars, not the global academic community, not the public. A handful of people decided who could see them. Years passed, nothing was released. Decades passed, still nothing. The explanation was always technical. The fragments were fragile, the languages were complex. The reconstruction took time. That explanation sounds reasonable until you realize the scrolls were already translated. Photographs existed, transcriptions existed. They just weren't shared. Independent scholars were denied access. Requests were rejected. Questions were brushed aside. And the longer this went on, the harder it became to ignore what was actually happening. The scrolls didn't destroy the Bible. They complicated it. They showed that early Judaism and early Christianity were not uniform. They showed competing beliefs, competing messianic ideas, texts that didn't line up neatly with later doctrine. That's not heresy, that's history. But history creates problems for institutions built on certainty. Because if belief evolved, then authority evolved with it. And if authority evolved, it can be questioned. Only in the 1990s did control finally break. Photographs leaked, access widened, publication accelerated, and the world saw what had been withheld for nearly 50 years. Not because the truth changed, but because holding it was no longer possible. So ask yourself the question people still avoid. If the delay was harmless, why fight so hard to maintain it? And if control over the scrolls meant control over interpretation, what else has been managed the same way? Because once you see this pattern, you can't unsee it. Who decides who gets access? This is where power stops being abstract. Because access to history is not random, it is granted. If you want into the archive, you don't just show credentials, you submit a request. You define your subject, you explain your purpose, and someone decides whether your questions are acceptable. Not whether you're intelligent, not whether you're qualified, whether your line of inquiry fits within boundaries. That distinction matters, because boundaries shape outcomes. Scholars who ask narrow questions get narrow answers. Scholars who challenge foundations rarely get past the door. This doesn't require threats. It doesn't require censorship. It requires selection. And selection is invisible, because the public never sees the rejected applications. They never hear the questions that were never allowed. So what reaches the world appears neutral, careful, academic, balanced. But balance only exists inside the frame you're given. This is how narratives stay intact, not by lying, by limiting perspective. And when the same institution that preserved the documents also decides who interprets them, history stops being a record. It becomes a performance. Because the most powerful form of control isn't force. It's deciding which questions are allowed to exist. Faith versus power. Here's the line no one likes to cross. Faith is personal. Power is not. Faith asks people to believe. Power asks people to obey. When those two align, institutions thrive. When they don't, institutions tighten control. History complicates faith because it refuses to stay simple. It introduces contradictions, multiple voices, alternate timelines, beliefs that evolved instead of descending fully formed. That kind of complexity doesn't destroy belief, it threatens authority. Because authority depends on certainty, clear lines, fixed interpretations, a single story told the same way for generations. Once people see belief as something shaped over time, they start asking, who did the shaping? And that's the danger, not doubt, but independence. If faith can be understood without intermediaries, what role does the gatekeeper play? If people can read the sources, interpret them, and disagree openly, control becomes optional. And optional control is no control at all. This is why complexity is managed, why access is filtered, why some truths arrive centuries too late to matter. Because faith may survive scrutiny, but power rarely does. The pattern. By now, the pattern should be obvious. History isn't lost, it's managed. Documents aren't destroyed, they're delayed. Access isn't denied outright, it's filtered. Every step is defensible on its own. Preservation, context, responsibility. But taken together, they form something else. A system where institutions decide when truth is safe, not safe for society, safe for authority. The Vatican is not unique in this. Governments do it, corporations do it, academia does it. But when belief is involved, the stakes are higher. Because belief shapes morality, morality shapes law, and law shapes obedience. Control the past, and you influence the present. Control interpretation, and you influence the future. This doesn't require a single conspiracy. It doesn't require secret meetings or hidden rooms. It only requires alignment between institutions that benefit from stability and people who are told certainty is protection. But certainty comes at a cost. It costs curiosity, it costs debate, and eventually, it costs truth. The most dangerous idea is not that institutions lie, it's that they decide what questions are worth asking. And once that happens, history stops belonging to everyone. It belongs to whoever holds the keys. Part 8. The question they can't answer. By now, the argument isn't about documents, it's about control. No institution keeps this much history locked away by accident. No archive restricts access, filters scholars, and delays release for centuries without understanding the power that gives them. This isn't about one scroll, or one gospel, or one sealed document. It's about who decides what version of history you grow up believing. Because belief doesn't start in churches, it starts with stories. And whoever controls the oldest stories controls the foundation. The Vatican says it protects faith. Maybe it does. But protection can look a lot like containment, depending on which side of the door you're on. Ask yourself something honestly. If the sealed documents change nothing, why not release them? If the excluded texts don't matter, why were they fought over? If history only reinforces belief, why does it need permission? Institutions don't fear lies. They fear reinterpretation, because reinterpretation removes the middleman. And once people realize faith, truth, and meaning can be explored without approval, authority becomes optional. This doesn't mean everything hidden is explosive. It means everything hidden was judged too disruptive to release freely. And that decision was made by people. Not prophets, not gods, people. So the real question isn't what the Vatican is hiding. It's why they still believe they should decide when you're allowed to see it. This file doesn't close with answers. It closes with a responsibility to question, to argue, and to decide for yourself what faith, history, and truth mean without permission. This has been the Quiet Files, and this file remains open.